Sure. About 8 years ago, I went to see a doctor with what I thought was a running injury, and he said, well, it's probably some torn ligaments in your hip or possibly in your knee, and the pain is radiating. Let's just take an MRI to see what's going on in there. And they did, and they found out that I had a tumor the size of a baseball in my abdomen, and that I needed to see an oncologist and get this thing figured out right away. We thought it was a soft tissue malignancy. Thankfully, it turned out to be benign. But in the hospital right before I had surgery, some researchers were asking me about my chemical exposure. And I said, you know, I haven't been exposed to any industrial chemicals as I know of because I've only been a journalist and a professor for my career. And they said, no, we're talking about consumer products, things that you would find in your everyday life, the chemicals that are in your carpeting or in your upholstery or in your drinking water or in your lawn chemicals or in your the plywood in your house or the paints or all the things that we come into contact every day. So that's what led me to come up with these questions and led me to pursue this book. It's a great question. Depending on how old your house is, oftentimes if you have a really old house, it was built with very chemically benign products. I mean, it was made out of things like wood and brick, glass, that sort of thing. They say that new construction is one of the greatest sources of chemical exposure because you're putting in a lot of formaldehyde in plywood, for example. You're putting in a lot of glues if you're gluing down different kinds of flooring. You're putting in a lot of new furniture, which is often made with upholstery that is treated with all kinds of things, flame retardants and stain-resistant chemicals, that sort of thing. So new housing is one of the greatest sources. I'm talking structurally, even before you put all your furniture and things into it. So that's a time when, as a consumer or home buyer, it's really a good time to think, you know, if you have a choice, what do you want your flooring to be made out of? You actually have an option to put flooring in that is quite chemically benign, or you can just say put in whatever is cheapest, and chances are you're going to get stuff that is more toxic. So being a home buyer or a home builder is really a great time to pay attention to some of these questions. So a lot of people love what they call the new car smell. It turns out the new car smell is not perfectly benign. I mean, the chemicals that are used in your car are often the same chemicals that you'll find in different products in your house. So the plastic dashboard, for example, is what they say off-gassing, right? The upholstery in your car is off-gassing, meaning the chemicals that they use to make it are becoming aerosolized or becoming ambient in the air, and you can, of course, actually smell it. If you've ever noticed when you get into an old car, you don't smell that because that stuff is done off-gassing. It's kind of like when you get a new mattress and you open up the box and you open up the plastic and you rip open that plastic bag. If you stick your face in there, you get a big old smell of what your mattress is made out of. And if it gives you a headache, it's because there are neurotoxic chemicals in that mattress. So the same thing with that new car smell. It is not a bed of roses that you're smelling when you open that door up. Our municipal water supply has been found to contain everything from pesticides running off of farms, to fertilizers running off of household lawns, to petrochemicals running off of parking lots, to pharmaceutical drugs that are not completely metabolized when people take their drugs. Prescription drugs, illegal drugs, you can test for all of that and you can find it all in the water after it's been treated. So why would that be? The answer really has to do with the way cities have been treating their water for a very long time. So in the United States, a lot of the municipal water plants were built 150 years ago with the intention of getting rid of things like cholera and dysentery, things like that, big public health problems that were killing children and all that. That stuff is gone. In the United States, people don't die of cholera anymore. But these treatment plants are not designed to deal with these new problems because, of course, we didn't have these problems 150 years ago. So technology for cleaning up drinking water has not moved as quickly as the insults to drinking water have. So the reason that drinking water is so problematic is because we haven't figured out a way to take stuff out that is getting in. They're finding nanoparticles in water from all kinds of sources, including things like sunscreen, where you probably know that when you put on sunscreen and it vanishes into your skin, which everybody loves, That just means that these particles are driving it deeper and deeper into your skin. Those nanoparticles don't disappear. I mean, really the bottom line is that nothing ever disappears. So you put it on your skin, it's going to show up in your drinking water. You put it on your yard, it's going to show up in the drinking water. You put it on your farm, you put it in your car. Whatever you're doing, it always comes back around again. So the idea about using benign products is not just for the immediate safety of it, but it's for the long-term safety of it, because benign products stay benign for a long time too. The Centers for Disease Control at the federal level and a lot of state health groups have been doing what they call body burden studies, where volunteers can contribute their blood, typically their blood, their hair, and their urine to laboratories, and they can tell you what chemicals are in your body at this moment. This is not something you might be exposed to or something that's in the environment somewhere, but these are things that are in your body, manifesting in your tissues or in your fluids. And in every study that they do, everybody who volunteers shows dozens and dozens and dozens of these chemicals. So for example, if you drink a lot of water out of plastic water bottles that are made with this chemical called phthalates, they can find the phthalates in your body and they can quantify this. And if you drink a lot of water, they find a lot of phthalates. If you drink a lot of liquids out of a bisphenol A bottle, they can find bisphenol A in your blood. Same with flame retardants, same with stain-resistant chemicals, same with formaldehyde. Anything you test for, they will find. So, you know, one question is, how do we prove that these chemicals are causing us problems? It's very difficult to say that I got cancer because of this one kind of paint, or I got cancer because of this one kind of flame retardant. But if you can start by saying, I can prove that these chemicals in that product are now inside my body, we're getting incrementally closer to being able to connect the dots on these things. Sure. So lawn care in the United States is very big business. And companies have convinced people that putting a lot of fertilizers and a lot of herbicides on your yard is a very good thing to do, that it'll please your neighbors, it'll please your community, everything will look nice and tidy because it'll all be perfectly manicured grass. The problem with all that is those herbicides are not benign. The herbicides that are sprayed on your yard by a company, or if you go buy the stuff in a hardware store, many of them are quite toxic. The fertilizers that you put on your grass may be good for your grass, but it also will run off of your lawn the first time it rains, and then it runs into a creek and it runs into a bay, and it causes all kinds of ecological problems downstream. So the truth is that lawns don't need so much chemical attention. Lawns would be pretty happy just the way they are. And the bigger thing is that grass is not actually the ideal thing to have in your yard anyway. The ideal thing to have in your yard are things that are actually prettier, like flowering plants that look beautiful, and they have the side benefit of attracting butterflies, attracting songbirds. So if you have a different vision for what your lawn could look like, if it didn't have to look like carpet, if it could actually look like a flower garden, there would be aesthetic benefits for you. You would have no toxic chemicals, and the added benefit was you would be having many more birds and butterflies visiting your property, which is also beautiful. And of course, many of those birds and butterflies are endangered because there's so little sustenance for them. There's too little habitat, there's too little food sources. So if you could turn your yard, even 10% of your yard, into something that birds and butterflies would enjoy visiting, it would be all to the good for the larger community. Yeah, so one chapter in the book is what I call a toxic safari through a big box store. So my wife and I went aisle by aisle in one of these giant suburban mall stores and just looked at products, and we looked at what was on the labels. If a product didn't have a label on it, we asked ourselves why it didn't have a label, because we already knew that there were things in that were particularly troublesome. This was especially true in the cosmetics aisle, where the cosmetics industry has effectively made it possible for them to have products on the shelf that have no labels on them, even though they have well-known carcinogens in them or hormone disruptors in them. So we just went to see what we could find. And it turns out if you go into a store not with an intention of buying things, but with an intention of seeing things as they actually are, what do things smell like? You walk into a big box store and you will be overwhelmed by smells. And those smells are all synthetic. So the store we went into, and I kind of make fun of this in the book, but we were overwhelmed with the smell of lavender. Like there was lavender everywhere. There was lavender in in the scented candles aisle, there was lavender in the deodorant aisle, there was lavender in the air freshener aisle, there was lavender in the laundry detergent aisle. Wherever you went, the potpourri, I mean, there was lavender everywhere, and you felt so overwhelmed with lavender that it actually made you nauseous. And all this stuff is sold as a way of making things smell better. But of course, it's also giving you a headache. And if it's giving you a headache, it's a problem. And it turns out that you can make your house smell nice in a lot of ways that don't require that you buy something. You can open your window, for one thing. Or, you know, they sell you products that will make your house smell like an apple pie. Well, you could bake an apple pie. That would be another way to do it, and you won't be exposed to neurotoxins. So that was kind of the fun of, I mean, it was kind of dark humor, but the idea was that you could take a slightly, you know, ironic take on a lot of these products and try to see things from a different point of view. I think the best thing to do to limit your exposure to toxic chemicals is to do what you can to become more conscious of how you spend your money. Now that could mean buying things that are built out of plants instead of out of petrochemicals. It also could mean not buying anything. I mean, the truth is that most people don't actually need to buy as much stuff as they do. It's very hard to resist because marketers have become very effective at convincing us that we need to keep buying stuff. And the fact that so many of the things that we buy are demonstrably not good for us should be some indication that maybe we should change our buying habits. So buying less, buying more benign products, and keeping an eye on your health and the community's health, in addition to the other things that you're spending money for, would be a great way to think about it. Putting your health at the top of the list of things you think about would be a good first step. The Environmental Protection Agency, like other federal agencies, has great intentions, and they were founded with great intentions, whether they're protecting our water or our food or our consumer products. The problem is that because they are, by definition, regulatory agencies, they exist to keep an eye on industry. And industry doesn't like having someone keep an eye on them. So what industry has been able to do is put its own people in the political appointed positions at the head of these agencies. So whenever a new president comes in, they get to appoint the head of all these agencies. And very frequently they put people in charge of the agencies that came from the very industries that these regulatory agencies are supposed to be keeping an eye on. So one of the reasons they're so ineffective is because there is like a political wall that the science can't get past. Because if there is science or policy that is unfriendly to industry, the industry people inside these agencies will squash it. So these agencies are really not nearly as independent as people think they are. And one of the reasons, or one of the things that we could do to improve that would be to keep a limit on the number of industry insiders that actually run these agencies. That would be a really good first step. I am the author of a book called What's Gotten Into Us? Staying Healthy in a Toxic World, which is about the toxic problems that we encounter with our consumer products. I am also the author of a book called Poison Spring, which is a book that I co-wrote with someone who worked at the Environmental Protection Agency for 25 years. And that book tells a story about the way regulatory agencies have been compromised by industry people. Both books are widely available in bookstores or online.